The morning sun cast long shadows across the wheat fields of New Haven as Jake Morrison walked through the colony's main street. Children's laughter echoed from the schoolyard where Lisa Grant was teaching her class under the shade of the old oak tree. Jake smiled and waved at his 8-year-old daughter Amy, who was sitting with her best friend Sophie, both girls completely absorbed in their drawing tablets. New Haven was everything Jake had hoped for when he applied to be colony administrator 5 years ago. The planet offered rich soil, clean air, and most importantly, a safe place to raise his children. His wife had died in a transport accident 3 years back, leaving him to care for Amy and his younger son Tommy alone. The colony had become their family, with neighbors like Lisa Grant helping him navigate single parenthood. Ben Carter jogged past on his morning security patrol, nodding to Jake as he headed toward the communications center. Ben took his job as security chief seriously, even though the most dangerous thing they had dealt with in months was old Farmer Peterson's escaped livestock wandering into the crop fields. The peaceful routine was shattered when the proximity alarms began wailing across the colony. Jake's communicator crackled to life with Ben's urgent voice calling all senior staff to the administration building immediately. Lisa heard the alarms too and quickly gathered her students. Amy looked up at her teacher with wide eyes, not understanding why the adult suddenly looked so worried. Lisa forced herself to smile as she led the children toward the community center, following the emergency protocols they had practiced but never expected to use. Jake reached the administration building to find Ben staring at multiple screens showing massive ships emerging from hyperspace at the edge of their system. The vessels were unlike anything in human design, angular and predatory in appearance, with hulls that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The lead ship was enormous, easily 10 times the size of the largest human battleship Jake had ever seen. Smaller craft swarmed around it like insects, their formation precise and threatening. Ben's hands moved quickly across his console, trying to establish communication while simultaneously sending distress signals toward Earth. General Thexval stood on the bridge of his flagship, studying the primitive human settlement below through his tactical displays. The Zelkari had conquered dozens of species, and humans appeared no different from the others. Their technology was crude, their defenses laughable, and their resistance would be minimal. What puzzled Thexval was the intelligence reports about human social structure. His scouts had observed that humans devoted enormous resources to protecting and nurturing their smallest members. These juveniles received the best food, the finest accommodations, and constant attention from the adults. Clearly, these small humans were the actual leaders of their species, perhaps using some form of telepathic control over the larger, worker-class humans. The general's tactical officers confirmed that the colony's defensive capabilities were non-existent. A few atmospheric fighters and some basic shield generators were all that stood between the Zelkari and complete victory. Thexval decided to test his theory about human leadership hierarchy. Jake watched helplessly as the alien ships descended through New Haven's atmosphere. The lead vessel was so large it blocked out the sun as it settled over the colony's central district. Smaller ships landed throughout the settlement, disgorging armored figures that moved with military precision. Ben grabbed his sidearm, but Jake placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. They both knew resistance would be suicide against such overwhelming force. Their only hope was that someone had received their distress signal, and help was coming. The aliens were bipedal but clearly not human. They stood nearly 8 feet tall with 4 arms and skin that shifted color like a chameleon. Their armor was seamless and their weapons hummed with deadly energy. Most disturbing were their eyes, which showed intelligence but no trace of mercy or compassion. Lisa had successfully gathered all 43 children in the community center when the aliens arrived. She tried to keep them calm, reading stories and leading quiet songs, but even the youngest could sense the danger outside. Amy sat close to her teacher, holding Tommy's hand as her little brother tried not to cry. The door burst open and armored figures entered the community center. Lisa stepped protectively in front of her students, but the aliens moved past her as if she didn't exist. Their attention focused entirely on the children, confirming General Thexval's theory about human hierarchy. Jake and Ben were forced to their knees in the colony's main square along with every other adult. They watched in horror as the aliens herded the children out of buildings throughout the settlement. Amy caught sight of her father and tried to run to him, but alien hands gently but firmly guided her back to the group of captive children. General Thexval descended from his ship to personally oversee the operation. Through a translation device, his voice boomed across the colony. The humans would surrender completely and accept Zelkari rule, or their leaders would be executed. He gestured toward the terrified children, making his meaning clear. Jake felt rage building in his chest, unlike anything he had ever experienced. These creatures had taken his children, taken all the children, and thought they could use them as bargaining chips. He forced himself to remain calm, knowing that any aggressive action would endanger Amy and Tommy. Ben's security training kicked in as he memorized every detail of the alien soldiers, their weapons, and their formation. If rescue came, every piece of information might be critical. He noticed that the aliens seemed genuinely puzzled by adult human behavior, as if they had expected something different. Lisa was allowed to accompany the children, apparently because the aliens recognized her role as their caretaker. She whispered reassurances to each child as they were loaded onto the alien transport ships. Amy looked back at her father one last time before disappearing into the dark interior of the spacecraft. As the ships lifted off with their precious cargo, Jake made a decision that would change everything. He accessed the colony's long-range communication system and began transmitting on every available frequency. His message was simple but would resonate across human space with devastating effect. His voice carried the pain of every parent as he spoke into the transmitter. The aliens had made a fundamental miscalculation about human nature. They had taken the one thing that would unite every human faction, every government, every military force across the galaxy. They had taken human children. The transmission reached Earth 12 hours later, and within minutes every human world had received the same message. Admiral Kate Phillips was in a budget meeting when the communication arrived. She stood up slowly, her face pale as she realized the implications of what she had just heard. Across human space, mothers and fathers stopped what they were doing and looked toward the stars. The Zelkari Empire had just learned what every predator on Earth had discovered over millions of years of evolution. You could threaten an adult human and they might negotiate. You could attack their property and they might retreat. But if you threatened their children, they would fight until every last one of them was dead. Admiral Kate Phillips stood in the Earth Defense Force Command Center, watching as the massive holographic display filled with red dots representing every human military vessel in known space. The emergency session had been called 30 minutes after Jake Morrison's transmission reached Earth, and the response was unlike anything in human history. Captain Alex Turner burst through the command center doors, still wearing his training gear from the Special Forces facility. His team had been running combat simulations when the alert came through. Now they were being recalled for the largest military operation humanity had ever attempted. Dr. Ryan Cooper abandoned his research lab on Luna Station the moment he heard the news. His experimental weapons projects, classified at the highest levels, were suddenly being fast-tracked for immediate deployment. Technologies that were supposed to remain theoretical for decades were being prepared for actual combat. Maria Santos had been negotiating a trade agreement with the Centauri Alliance when her aide rushed into the conference room with the emergency bulletin. She immediately terminated the talks and began coordinating with every human diplomatic mission across the galaxy. Every favor would be called in, every alliance tested. The news spread through human space like wildfire. On Mars, the mining corporations began converting their industrial ships into military transports. The asteroid belt miners redirected their haulers toward Earth, carrying raw materials for weapons production. Even the Outer Rim pirates who had been fighting human authorities for years began broadcasting offers of assistance. Admiral Phillips had commanded fleets before, but nothing had prepared her for what she was witnessing now. Retired naval officers were returning to service without being asked. Corporate executives were liquidating entire companies to fund the war effort. Civilian volunteers with no military training were demanding to be taught how to fight. Captain Turner received his mission briefing from Admiral Phillips herself. His special forces teams would spearhead the rescue operation, but first they needed to locate where the children were being held. Intelligence suggested the Zelkari had taken them to their heavily fortified capital world, but confirmation was needed. Dr. Cooper's weapons lab became a 24-hour operation, as scientists who had been working on separate projects suddenly found themselves collaborating on military applications. Experimental plasma weapons were being manufactured alongside new armor designs. Technologies that violated several interstellar treaties were being prepared for deployment without hesitation. On New Haven, Jake Morrison continued coordinating with the underground resistance Ben Carter had organized. The remaining colonists had gone into hiding in the surrounding wilderness, but they maintained communication with Earth through hidden transmitters. Every piece of intelligence about their Zelkari occupiers was transmitted to the growing human fleet. The alien invaders had established a garrison in the colony's main settlement, apparently confident that their hostage strategy would prevent any human retaliation. General Thexville remained on his flagship in orbit, studying reports about increasing human military activity with growing concern, but not yet understanding the magnitude of what was approaching. Lisa Grant found herself aboard the Zelkari transport ship with the captured children, trying to keep them calm during the long journey to their destination. Amy Foster had emerged as a natural leader among the children, helping the younger ones and organizing quiet activities to pass the time. Sophie, Lisa's daughter, stayed close to Amy, drawing strength from her friend's courage. The Zelkari guards seemed puzzled by the children's behavior. They had expected the human leaders to be more demanding, more authoritative. Instead, these small humans appeared frightened but remarkably resilient. Some of the alien soldiers began to question whether their intelligence about human society was accurate. Admiral Phillips received hourly reports as more ships arrived at the assembly point beyond Pluto. The fleet now numbered over 1,500 vessels of every class and description. Ancient frigates flew alongside modern battleships. Corporate security forces trained beside regular Navy units. The diversity was unprecedented, but the purpose was unified. Captain Turner's intelligence teams had finally confirmed the children's location through intercepted Zelkari communications. They were being held on Valdris Prime, the heavily defended capital world at the heart of the Zelkari Empire. The planet was protected by orbital defense platforms and patrolled by the Empire's most elite military units. Dr. Cooper's experimental weapons had passed their final tests, but using them would mean crossing lines humanity had never crossed before. His plasma cannons could punch through any known armor, but they would also irradiate entire sections of enemy ships. His new missiles carried warheads that could crack planetary surfaces. These were weapons designed not just to win battles, but to end civilizations. Maria Santos coordinated with human diplomatic missions throughout the galaxy, calling in every favor and alliance humanity had built over the past century. Other species were urged to stay neutral in the coming conflict. Some alien governments, recognizing the fury in human communications, quietly agreed to avoid Zelkari space entirely. The response from human colonies was overwhelming. Settlers who had never seen military service were volunteering for combat roles. Teachers, farmers, engineers, and merchants were learning to operate weapons and military equipment. The message was clear. An attack on human children was an attack on every human everywhere. Jake Morrison received encrypted communications from Admiral Phillips, requesting detailed intelligence about Zelkari troop movements and defensive positions on New Haven. Ben Carter's resistance network had documented everything, creating detailed maps and tactical assessments that would prove invaluable for the coming assault. On Valdris Prime, General Thexville reviewed intelligence reports about human fleet movements with increasing alarm. His analysts estimated that humanity was assembling the largest armada in galactic history, but surely they would not risk everything for a few dozen juveniles. The general still believed this was an elaborate bluff designed to force negotiations. The Zelkari military command was divided about how to respond. Some generals advocated for immediate execution of the hostages to demonstrate resolve. Others suggested using the children as bargaining chips in broader territorial negotiations. None of them understood that humanity had already decided the only acceptable outcome was the safe return of every single child. Admiral Phillips stood before the assembled fleet commanders. Her image broadcast to every ship in the armada. Her words were simple but carried the weight of an entire species' determination. They would travel to the heart of the Zelkari Empire and bring their children home. Any alien force that stood in their way would be destroyed without mercy or hesitation. Captain Turner's Special Forces teams began final preparations for what would be the most dangerous rescue mission in human history. They would have to fight through the most heavily defended system in Zelkari space, assault a fortified planet, and extract the children while under fire from an entire empire's military. Dr. Cooper loaded his experimental weapons onto the fleet's most powerful ships, knowing that their use would forever change how humanity was viewed by other species. But the alternative was leaving human children in alien hands, and that was simply unacceptable. The massive human fleet began its journey towards Zelkari space, carrying the hopes and fury of an entire species. Behind them, every human world continued sending reinforcements, supplies, and volunteers. The Zelkari Empire was about to learn what happened when someone threatened humanity's most precious treasure. General Thexaval walked through the detention facility on Valdris Prime, observing the human juveniles with growing confusion. His intelligence had been completely wrong about these creatures. The small humans showed none of the commanding presence or telepathic control abilities his analysts had predicted. Amy Foster sat in the corner of the holding area, surrounded by younger children who looked to her for comfort. She told them stories about home, about their parents who would never stop looking for them, and about how brave they all were. Her voice remained steady even though she was just as scared as the others. Lisa Grant moved between the children, checking on each one and making sure they ate the strange food the aliens provided. The Zelkari guard seemed almost respectful toward her, apparently recognizing her role as caretaker for what they still believed were the human leaders. Sophie clung to Amy's hand as they were brought before General Thexval for questioning. The massive alien studied them through his 4 eyes, searching for signs of the superior intelligence his scouts had reported. Instead, he found frightened children who asked only about their families and when they could go home. The general's interrogation techniques, designed to break adult minds, were useless against beings who simply did not understand the military concepts he was discussing. When he asked about human defensive capabilities, Amy told him about the playground equipment at school. When he demanded information about fleet movements, Sophie described the pretty lights she had seen in the night sky. Meanwhile, the human armada had reached the outer edge of Zelkari space, a force unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Admiral Phillips commanded over 2,000 ships from her flagship, the massive dreadnought Vengeance. Every human government, corporation, and military organization had contributed vessels to the rescue fleet. Captain Turner stood in the briefing room aboard Vengeance, studying holographic displays of Valdris Prime's defenses. The planet was protected by 12 orbital defense stations, each one capable of destroying multiple battleships. The surface installations included shield generators, missile batteries, and garrison forces numbering in the hundreds of thousands. Dr. Cooper's experimental weapons had been distributed throughout the fleet, turning ordinary ships into devastating weapons of war. His plasma cannons could melt through any known armor, while his new missiles carried warheads that could crack moons. Most terrifying were his gravity bombs, weapons that could create localized black holes. The Zelkari High Command finally began to understand the magnitude of the approaching threat when their long-range sensors detected the human fleet. The armada stretched across several light years, moving with purpose and coordination that spoke of absolute determination. Emergency meetings were called as generals and admirals struggled to comprehend how such a primitive species had assembled such overwhelming force. Admiral Phillips received the final intelligence reports from Captain Turner's reconnaissance teams. The children were confirmed to be held in a maximum security facility on Valdris Prime's northern continent. The building was surrounded by energy shields and protected by the Empire's elite guard units. Lisa Grant had managed to establish a routine for the children that helped maintain their morale. They held classes using lessons she remembered, played quiet games, and shared stories about their families. Amy had become her unofficial assistant, helping with the younger children and translating Lisa's instructions for those who were too scared to listen. The Zelkari guards reported their observations to General Thexval, noting that the human juveniles showed remarkable emotional resilience and group cooperation. They supported each other, shared resources equally, and maintained hope despite their circumstances. These behaviors were unlike anything the Zelkari had observed in other conquered species. Captain Turner's Special Forces teams completed their final preparations aboard the assault ships. They had studied every detail of the detention facility, memorized the layout, and identified multiple extraction routes. Each team member carried enough firepower to level a city block, but their primary mission was protecting the children during the rescue. Dr. Cooper monitored his weapon systems from the fleet's command ship, knowing that the technology he had created would change warfare forever. His gravity bombs alone violated several galactic treaties, but no human authority had questioned their deployment. The message was clear. Any weapon was acceptable if it brought their children home. General Thexaval received increasingly desperate reports from his subordinates about the approaching human fleet. The Empire's most experienced admirals were recommending immediate evacuation of Valdris Prime, abandoning the capital world rather than face the human armada. The general refused to consider retreat, but privately began to wonder if his decision to take the human juveniles had been a mistake. Amy Foster gathered the children around her as Lisa read them a story about brave knights rescuing prisoners from a dark castle. The parallels were not lost on the older children, who understood that their parents were coming for them. Amy told them that humans never abandoned their families, that no force in the galaxy was strong enough to keep them apart forever. The human fleet entered the Valdris system to find the Zelkari Empire's entire home defense force waiting for them. Over 500 alien warships formed defensive lines around their capital world, supported by orbital platforms and planetary shield generators. It was the most heavily defended system in known space. Admiral Phillips broadcast a message to the Zelkari fleet on all frequencies, her voice carrying the rage and determination of every human parent. The aliens had one chance to return the children unharmed and avoid complete destruction. Any hostile action would be met with overwhelming retaliation. Captain Turner's teams transferred to their assault craft, specialized ships designed to penetrate planetary defenses and extract personnel from heavily fortified positions. Each vessel carried enough Marines to fight through an army, equipped with the most advanced weapons humanity had ever produced. The Zelkari response came in the form of weapons fire as their fleet opened attack on the human armada. Energy beams and missile salvos filled space between the two forces, marking the beginning of what would become the most devastating battle in galactic history. Dr. Cooper's experimental weapons answered the alien attack with fury that stunned both sides. His plasma cannons vaporized entire Zelkari battleships with single shots, while his gravity bombs created spatial distortions that crushed multiple targets simultaneously. The technological advantage the aliens had enjoyed was instantly eliminated. General Thexval watched from his command center as human forces smashed through his empire's defenses with apparent ease. Ships that should have been destroyed continued fighting, despite massive damage, their crews refusing to retreat. While human children remained in captivity, Amy Foster heard the sounds of battle echoing through the detention facility as explosions lit up the sky above Valdris Prime. She told the younger children that the thunder meant their families were coming, that soon they would all be going home together. The space around Valdris Prime erupted into chaos as the human fleet tore through Zelkari defenses with a savagery that shocked veteran alien warriors. Admiral Phillips watched from her command bridge as human ships that should have retreated continued their assault despite catastrophic damage, their crews fighting until their vessels were nothing but floating wreckage. Captain Turner's assault craft punched through the planetary defense grid, his Marines preparing for the most dangerous rescue mission in human history. The ship shuddered under enemy fire, but Turner's pilot held course toward the detention facility where the children were held. Nothing would stop them from reaching those kids. Dr. Cooper's gravity bombs created massive distortions in space that crushed entire squadrons of Zelkari fighters. His plasma cannons melted through the hull of a massive alien dreadnought, sending it spinning out of control into Valdris Prime's upper atmosphere. The weapons he had created were rewriting the rules of space combat. On the surface of Valdris Prime, General Thexval felt his command bunker shake as human orbital bombardment began targeting military installations across the planet. His communications with the fleet were fragmentary, filled with desperate reports of ships being destroyed faster than his commanders could process. The Zelkari Empire's most elite guard units took defensive positions around the detention facility, but they had never faced enemies like the humans who were coming for them. These creatures fought with a fury that seemed to transcend rational military strategy, as if death was preferable to failure. Amy Foster gathered the younger children closer as the sounds of battle grew louder outside their prison. She could hear weapons fire and explosions getting nearer, which meant the rescue was almost here. Lisa Grant moved among the children, keeping them calm while secretly preparing for whatever was about to happen. Admiral Phillips received damage reports from across her fleet that would have forced any rational commander to retreat. Over 300 human ships had been destroyed or disabled, but the survivors pressed their attack with increased determination. She ordered her own flagship into the heart of the enemy formation, abandoning all defensive protocols. Captain Turner's assault ship broke through the facility's outer defenses, crash landing in the courtyard amid a storm of enemy fire. His Marines poured out of the wreckage, their advanced armor deflecting Zelkari energy weapons as they fought room by room toward the detention center. The Zelkari defenders found themselves facing opponents who seemed immune to fear or pain. Human soldiers continued fighting even after suffering wounds that should have been fatal. Driven by a protective instinct that overrode every survival mechanism, some alien warriors began to retreat rather than face such terrifying determination. Dr. Cooper's experimental shield technology protected the human assault teams as they advanced through the facility. His personal force fields could absorb massive amounts of damage, allowing the Marines to push forward through defensive positions that should have been impregnable. General Thexval received reports that human forces had breached the detention facility and were fighting their way toward the holding areas. His own elite guards, troops who had never retreated from any battle, were sending desperate pleas for reinforcement as they faced enemies who fought like creatures possessed. Lisa Grant heard human voices shouting in the corridor outside their cell, speaking in accents she recognized from Earth. She gathered the children behind her, preparing them for rescue while making sure none of them would be caught in crossfire when their liberators arrived. The battle for the facility became intensely personal as Captain Turner led his teams through corridors filled with desperate Zelkari defenders. Every room had to be cleared, every passage secured, while constantly moving toward the children who were depending on them for salvation. Amy Foster stood up when she heard familiar sounds of human equipment and voices getting closer to their location. She told the other children that their families had come for them, just like she had promised they would. The younger ones pressed close to her, drawing courage from her confidence. Admiral Phillips watched, her fleet sacrifice itself ship by ship to maintain the assault on Valdris Prime. The battleship Freedom rammed a Zelkari orbital platform, rather than allow it to fire on the surface rescue operation. The cruiser Liberty continued fighting with half its hull missing, its crew refusing evacuation orders. Dr. Cooper's weapons reached their full devastating potential as his experimental missiles struck the planet's military command centers. The explosions were visible from orbit, massive fireballs that eliminated entire Zelkari army divisions and their supporting infrastructure. Captain Turner's Marines reached the final corridor leading to the detention cells, where they encountered General Thexval himself leading a last desperate defense. The alien commander had finally realized what he was facing, but his understanding came too late to change the outcome. The general fired his personal weapon at the advancing humans, but their armor absorbed the energy blasts without effect. Turner's return fire sent the massive alien crashing to the floor, ending the last organized resistance between the rescue teams and the children. Lisa Grant heard the distinctive sound of human military equipment cutting through the cell door, followed by voices she had dreamed of hearing for weeks. Captain Turner's team entered the detention area to find 43 children and one teacher, all alive and relatively unharmed. Amy Foster ran toward the rescue team, followed by all the other children who had been waiting for this moment since their capture. The hardened Marines found themselves overwhelmed by small arms hugging them and voices thanking them for coming to bring them home. Admiral Phillips received confirmation that all children had been located and were being evacuated to the rescue ships. She immediately ordered the fleet to begin withdrawal, but not before Dr. Cooper's final weapons destroyed every military installation on Valdris Prime. The human assault ships lifted off from the burning planet carrying their precious cargo while the orbital battle continued around them. Fighter escorts surrounded the evacuation vessels, ensuring no enemy fire could threaten the children during their escape. General Thexval lay dying among the ruins of his command center, finally understanding the magnitude of his mistake. He had taken the one thing that would unite every human faction across the galaxy, transforming a peaceful species into the most dangerous military force the universe had ever seen. Captain Turner stayed with the children during the evacuation flight, watching Amy Foster comfort the younger ones while Lisa Grant conducted an impromptu head count to ensure everyone was accounted for. They were going home, but the cost of bringing them back had changed humanity forever. The rescue ship carrying the children broke free of Valdris Prime's gravity well as the planet burned beneath them. Amy Foster pressed her face against the viewing port, watching the alien world grow smaller while Captain Turner's Marines maintained protective positions around all 43 rescued children. Lisa Grant conducted another head count, her hands shaking as she confirmed that every single child was safely aboard the evacuation vessel. Sophie sat close to her mother, still processing the reality that their nightmare was finally ending. The younger children had fallen asleep, despite the sounds of ongoing battle outside their ship. Admiral Phillips received the confirmation she had been waiting for since the operation began. All children were secure and en route to the fleet's medical ships. She immediately transmitted the news across the human armada, watching as ship after ship acknowledged the successful rescue with bursts of celebratory weapons fire. Captain Turner sat with Amy Foster as the medical team checked each child for injuries or signs of mistreatment. Amy told him about how Lisa had kept them all together, how the older children had protected the younger ones, and how they had never stopped believing that their families would come for them. The space battle around Valdris Prime had evolved into something beyond military strategy. Human ships continued their assault on remaining Zelkari positions with a methodical fury that spoke of absolute determination to eliminate any threat to the rescued children. No alien vessel was allowed to approach the evacuation route. Dr. Cooper's final experimental weapons were deployed against the Zelkari command structure with devastating effect. His gravity bombs collapsed the planetary defense grid, while his plasma cannon systematically destroyed every military installation on the planet's surface. The Empire's capital world was being rendered completely defenseless. The surviving Zelkari forces began broadcasting surrender signals, but the human fleet showed no interest in accepting their capitulation. Admiral Phillips had made the decision that an empire which would threaten children posed an ongoing danger that had to be eliminated completely. Lisa Grant found herself aboard the medical ship Mercy, watching as doctors examined each child with incredible care and attention. The medical staff treated every minor scrape or bruise as if it were a serious injury, reflecting the value humanity placed on these young lives. Amy Foster became the unofficial spokesperson for the rescued children, describing their treatment to the medical teams and intelligence officers. Her composure and strength impressed everyone who met her, though she was still just an 8-year-old girl who wanted to see her father again. The destruction of the Zelkari Empire proceeded with mechanical precision as human forces eliminated every military asset and command center across their territory. Other alien species watched in stunned silence as humanity demonstrated what happened to civilizations that threatened human children. Captain Turner received new orders to escort the children directly back to Earth, bypassing the normal military protocols for rescued personnel. The rescued children would receive the highest level of protection and care that human civilization could provide. Admiral Phillips stood on her damaged bridge, surveying the wreckage of what had once been the most powerful military force in this sector of the galaxy. The Zelkari Empire no longer existed as a functional entity, its leadership dead and its military infrastructure completely destroyed. Dr. Cooper's weapons had proven so effective that other alien governments were already requesting detailed specifications, hoping to understand the technology that had eliminated an entire interstellar empire in a matter of days. The human government classified all information about the new weapon systems. The journey back to human space became a celebration of survival and reunion. Lisa Grant organized activities for the children, helping them process their experiences while maintaining the sense of safety and security they needed. Amy Foster continued to demonstrate leadership qualities that amazed the adult observers. News of the successful rescue spread across human civilization faster than the returning fleet itself. Every human world prepared celebrations for the returning children while governments worked to establish new policies regarding the protection of human young throughout the galaxy. Captain Turner found himself promoted to general for his role in the rescue operation. Though he remained focused on ensuring the children's safe return home, his Marines had become temporary guardians for the rescued children, forming bonds that would last for years. The medical teams aboard Mercy completed their examinations and declared all 43 children to be in remarkably good health considering their ordeal. Lisa Grant's care during their captivity had prevented both physical and psychological trauma that could have had lasting effects. Admiral Phillips received reports from across the former Zelkari territory as human forces completed their systematic destruction of the Empire's military capabilities. No alien government protested the elimination of the Zelkari. Having witnessed what happened to species that threatened human children, Amy Foster stood in the observation deck of the medical ship, looking out at the stars and thinking about her father Jake back on New Haven. She knew he was worried about her, but she also knew that nothing in the universe could have stopped him from finding a way to bring her home. The return to Earth became a moment of transformation for human civilization. The rescue operation had united every human faction, government, and military organization in a way that peaceful diplomacy had never achieved. The bonds forged during the crisis would reshape human society for generations. Lisa Grant prepared the children for their arrival on Earth, helping them understand that they had become symbols of human determination and love. Their survival had justified the enormous cost of the rescue operation and validated humanity's commitment to protecting its young Captain Turners. Final report documented not just the military success of the operation, but the extraordinary courage shown by the children during their captivity. Amy Foster and her classmates had demonstrated that human strength came from more than just military technology. The fleet carrying the rescued children entered Earth's solar system to find thousands of ships waiting to escort them home. Every human vessel in the area had come to welcome back the Yeo children whose kidnapping had triggered the largest military operation in galactic history. Admiral Phillips transmitted her final message to the human government, confirming that all children had been rescued safely and that the threat posed by the Zelkari Empire had been permanently eliminated. The operation had cost thousands of human lives and hundreds of ships, but every sacrifice had been justified by the children's safe return. Amy Foster walked down the ramp of the rescue ship at Earth's main spaceport, surrounded by her fellow survivors and escorted by the heroes who had risked everything to bring them home. Behind her, the stars held new meaning for humanity, which had proven that no force in the galaxy was strong enough to separate human families. The galaxy had learned that humans were not just protective of their children, but willing to become the most dangerous species in the universe to anyone who threatened them. That lesson would echo across the stars for centuries to come.